Hi, it's Matthew Holt, another THCB Spotlight. I am talking with Maya Saeed. Maya is the CEO of Outcomes4Me, which is a relatively new, quite new-ish company in the cancer navigation space, which those of you who've been paying attention has really hotted up. A bunch of different people are raising money and building navigation tools just for cancer. And alongside this, there's obviously a whole bunch of other navigation tools being built, and folks like Accolade and now included Health, NA, Grand Rounds, Transcarent, and others getting involved in this space. So Maya, welcome, and tell me first up a little bit about your background. You are not the typical tech bro that we can often meet. Tell me, you come from not only academia but also from the Middle East. So tell me a bit about how you feel that makes you coming into the world of digital health.
First of all, Matthew, thank you for hosting me. So yeah, as you alluded, so I mean, I grew up in Syria, in the Middle East, and I found myself in the United States in the mid-90s, as you know, the internet revolution was about to happen. So in some sense, I grew up, I went to undergrad here, that's why I came here. And I got to experience, you know, the internet.com area, if you will. That had a big impact in terms of, you know, how I see digital health. I grew up in a family of medical doctors, generations on both sides. And so to come and experience this internet revolution and think about it with a medical background is kind of what shaped who I am today.
Fantastic. So you have this background in engineering, computational biology. You have way too many degrees from MIT, and I don't know if they ever will let you out at one point. And then you were involved in pharma, in research and R&D, and now you are kind of out the other end of that. What prompted the leaving of sort of the safe haven of big pharma to go into the startup world and to go away from R&D to go more towards the patient-facing world? Why did you decide to make that jump?
Yeah, great question. So maybe I can start by saying, you know, I've always been passionate by, you know, creating and having an impact. And that's kind of what led me, you know, to come to the States, what led me to do, you know, all the studies I've done, and what led me originally to pharma, which is where I spent most of my career until starting the company. And at the time, what attracted me about pharma is really kind of, you know, especially if you think about it in cancer, which is the space we're in, it's like, you know, it's a bit crazy to remember that Herceptin, which has revolutionized how breast cancer is treated, was only approved in the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. So it feels like a long time, but it's not that long of a time. And so the innovation in pharma has really had a great impact. And that's why I got attracted to pharma. The reason I left pharma to start Outcomes4Me is, in particular, in my last role in pharma, where I was heading global market access and policy for the oncology business of Novartis, I came to appreciate that we can have all the innovation in the world, but without it reaching the patient where they are, we're not going to be able to cure disease or even alleviate disease. And so two things got me to jump ship. One is professionally and seeing where the environment is today, right? Like both from a pharma industry perspective, we see more and more competition, more and more therapeutic alternatives. That means there are choices. But also from a system side, we're starting to talk about what constitutes value, right? What is value-based care or value pricing or all these elements? And when you look at it in cancer in particular, it's not clear what constitutes value. And actually, the meaning of value is very specific to every patient, right? Do I care if I was diagnosed with a end-stage disease? Do I care about 2 more months extending life, or do I care about 4 months of better living, shorter life but better life? And unfortunately, today the treatments are such that there's a trade-off at that level to be made. So all this to say is, first of all, from the business side of things, there's a real gap today in terms of really enabling value-based care. And that's around lacking of understanding how treatments are being given in the real world, how people are actually taking these treatments and how they're accessing them. The second half of the story, which is more of a personal one, is a year before I started the company, I ended up being diagnosed with essentially what ended up being a benign mass. But I became a patient for the first time in my life for a period of 6 months. So I was not, diagnosed with something as serious as cancer, but it was serious enough that it needed open surgery and it needed, quite a bit of navigation within the healthcare system. And I have to say that I was shocked and humbled because it was the first time I realized that throughout my career, I've been saying I am patient focused, and I came to truly believe that I was. And then I realized I actually had never been a patient in my life. And the first time I became one, that experience was overwhelming, was threatening, and was just, it carried a lot of emotions. So anyway, so let me stop there, and kind of that what triggered me to essentially create what Outcomes4Me is today.
Yeah, and look, I think this is you're not by any means the first person who's been deep in the healthcare industry. Many doctors have this, and then they actually flip sides to become a patient. I find it very trite when I hear people say, oh, we're all going to be patients one day, or we're all patients now. The experience of somebody who's really in it, who's got a serious disease, significant diagnosis, is looking through their diagnosis, is so different than they did, for that 5, 10, 20% of the population, so different from everybody else that I think, we forget that a lot. And I frequently shout at people who say, oh, well, we're all consumers of health, we're all patients. It's a very different world for people who really have things going on. And you've built Outcomes4Me to aim at that. So when I look at what you've built, it's an app, a service suite that has news and information and tracking, has access to clinical trials. There's a bunch of different stuff in it. But I'm interested in hearing a bit about your vision. You managed to convince a couple of smart people in the world, folks at AMV and Northpoint, among others, to give you some money for this. So I'm interested in hearing about your vision for what you think the current application is and what it's going to become in terms of and how you're going to get it in the hands. And when you get it in the hands of more cancer patients, you start with breast cancer, what are they actually going to use it for? What's the thing they really need?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So let me start with the vision, and then we can come back to where we are today, because I think it's very important to put it in that context. And we like to believe we like to refer to what we're building is not as a patient navigation platform, but a patient empowerment platform. And let me explain what that means. So today, the problem of the healthcare system is that we as patients have zero power in it. But without us as patients, there is no healthcare system. And we all know why is that the case, right? Like ultimately, the ultimate decision maker is not the consumer. The ultimate payer is not the consumer directly. So that means that while I think the majority of people that enter the healthcare system, whatever they do, are well-intended to focus on the patient, we very quickly lose track of that focus and focus on whoever is the customer. And the customer is not the patient for many, many companies. And so what we would like to do is fundamentally change that equation, develop a platform that is meeting people where they are. And meeting people where they are is not only about meeting them where clinically they are, where in their diagnosis they are. It's meeting them where they are physically, meeting them where they are emotionally, addressing their needs as their needs evolve. People, we all experience the disease continuously. If somebody is diagnosed with cancer, it becomes part of their life. But then the healthcare system is organized so that the patient interact with it episodically, not continuously. And that's really what we're focusing on. So ultimately, what we're solving is essentially, we can refer to it patient navigation, but at the level we're talking about, it's true patient empowerment, where we all as consumers today, we have a lot of power when it comes to our finances. We have a lot of power when it comes to our, what we buy, our consumer practices. We have zero power when it comes to our healthcare. That needs to change, and that's what we're solving.
Very good. So tell me if I'm a cancer patient using Outcomes4Me today, what is it? What do I do? What do I get? And how do you think it's going to change?
So let me focus on the first use case we focused on. So one of the things that I know it sounds like it sounds just naive to say, you know, it was a humbling experience where I realized I'd never been a patient and how can I be patient focused, but it's true, is when we started the company, we wanted to make sure we don't make that mistake. So we started with a single disease, and that's breast cancer. And we also wanted to focus in one area, which is just diagnosed or in active treatment. And that's today where we're focused. So when a person is diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer, you know, emotionally, beyond, you know, the shock, there's really two elements, two emotions that hit us. One is the sense of loss of control, right? All of a sudden, we lost control of something that we thought, you know, of our life. We don't know how things are going to change. And then the second is we don't know enough to know, you know, what is, we want to be hopeful. We essentially want a sense of hope. And today, when a person is diagnosed with cancer, whatever they do, they essentially have at the beginning, beyond the shock, one of two questions. What are my options? And how is my life going to change? And how can I best manage this life? The problem today is to answer with any of these two questions. There's really only two options. One of them is not an option. To really answer it properly, we need infinite time with the provider. And the reason we need infinite time is not because some providers could give us all the information when we meet them, but we're not ready to consume it. And when we're emotionally ready to consume it, it needs to be there when we are. So that's not even an option in today's healthcare system. So the alternative is in anything we do, whether it's technology enabled or not, is more or less equivalent to a Google search. And what is the problem of a Google search? The problem of a Google search is twofold. One, the burden of search is on us as users. We have to know what we're looking for to find it. If I just got diagnosed with breast cancer, I don't know that HER2 status is the thing. I don't know that hormone status is the thing. How can I know what to search for? That's number one. Number two is, even if I knew exactly what I'm looking for, I am not equipped to be able to consume the information I get it, to make a judgment call, to know, is this relevant to me today or tomorrow? Is this scientific or this is an anecdote? And so what I end up with as a feeling is it's an overwhelming feeling. So what we've developed at Outcomes4Me is what we call a personalized evidence-based platform. We decided to start by being mobile, so it's a mobile app, so that we can reach people wherever they are with technology, knowing that we're expanding now from beyond that. And then we wanted to help in this navigation. So you mentioned some of the feature sets of the app. We provide treatment options. This is actually very unique what we provide. What we've done is through a partnership with the NCCN. What we bring to patients is a personalized treatment options based on the NCCN clinical guidelines, the guidelines that are issued to providers, not patients. We transformed them to a partnership with the NCCN and are making them available to patients. We do the same on clinical trials, but not only clinical trial matching, where there's a lot of tools that do that, but it's also to give it within the context of the timing of the disease, personalized. And also where people are, geolocated. So if I see a match, the patient on the platform could actually see the center that has that trial that's closest to them and contact them. These are just examples of some of the features in there.
So very good. So there are, of course, there have been a lot of resources for cancer patients at this point, right? There have been a lot of cancer communities going all the way back to Jules Friedman and ACOR in the 90s, and there are a number of people building more recently navigation apps, Navigating Cancer, and a few others, right? Jasper Health's a new one, which has raised money, who are doing this. And then there's also been some apps and some technologies and tools for communicating between providers and cancer patients. I can think of Noon Health, which got bought by Varian, and some others. So looking at your app at the moment, it looks like it's a very standalone thing aimed just at patients. How do you perceive developing in the ecosystem of, what a patient needs, and how the other half of that is, how are patients going to find out about you compared to all the other 57 million things being thrown at them when they come online?
Yeah, excellent question. So first of all, I appreciate that you said it, and it's exactly what we did. if we're going to do something that's truly patient empowering, we have to start directly on the patient side. If we start by an intermediary, it's not going to work. And that's why we started there first. And I say first, because ultimately, we're not going to be able to improve outcomes, which is really what we're after, if we're not enabling this patient-provider relationship, if we're not augmenting it. And so it's really around shared decision-making, and less so about an alternative option beyond your provider, right? Just so that it's very clear. So even though we go directly to patients, it's about enabling and augmenting that relationship, not replacing it. So, and also the other thing is, from the get-go, I told you, our very first partnership has been with the NCCN, which is the clinical authority on oncology. And so what we've done, we have and continue to do partnerships with providers. Some of it we've published on. So with Mass General Hospital, we did the study to show the how the app works. We published it at ASCO this year. We have a NCI, National Cancer Center Institute contract, where we're working, and we've announced this with Vanderbilt Cancer Center, to extend that into survivorship, what we've done into survivorship care. But one thing that's very important relative to a lot of different, different companies, what companies are doing, is going back to this direct to patient. And I'll come back to the distribution in a second, but I do want to spend a few seconds there. The direct to patient, if you really want to empower patients, there has to be a platform that's accessible to patient wherever they are. If we're relying only on providers to get there, we're going to always take that view, the provider view, which I think we missed the whole opportunity of actually solving the problem. Now, how do we get to patients? We get to them in multiple ways. One is direct on social media. I mean, today we have over 20,000 breast cancer patients on the platform, and we haven't been there for that long. And
Right.
that has been all through direct social media and being at the patient organizations. The second is through the providers. I mentioned we're starting to work with different providers, but these are really have been the two avenues. The other thing I do want to say, Matthew, is we're about really helping address also disparities of care. So we are today in every single state. And interestingly, before we covered all states in the United States, Alaska ended up being one of our first 5-10 states where patients downloaded the app. So it shows you where the needs are also.
Yeah, I mean, and that's interesting. We don't have time to get into it, but there's I've noticed over the years, I've had this conversation in patient groups, that there's been a lot of leading figures in patient groups, but there's been always in cancer underrepresentation of African American Hispanics, as you see elsewhere, and it's something that I'm a member of the Society on the board of Society for Participatory Medicine, and we're trying to address that. It's tough. It's obviously a very tough societal problem. Having said that, you are now in a venture-backed, it all sounds beautiful. You're now in a venture-backed company, and those investors will be at some point, I think, asking for their money back. I know Skip from Asset Management Ventures is incredibly patient because he's busy watching soccer most of the time. But you just raised a round from North Point. You raised 16 million, I think, in total now.
12 million. Yeah.
So talk to me about where the revenue comes from. Obviously, clinical trial recruiting is the obvious one I would look at and say that it's one that you can start making some money out of. But give me a sense about where you think the business is going to go.
Yeah, and one thing I did mention, so you did say, I'm an engineer by training. I've been in healthcare for a very long time before jumping ship. The reason I believe technology has not permeated healthcare enough is not a technology problem. We could solve a lot of the problems anytime, but it is a business model problem, because a lot of companies over the years, you know it better than I do, have solved a lot of very important patient problems, but then have disappeared because they ran out of money, they didn't have the right business model, etc. And so the business model is a very important, actually, element of what we do. So a couple of things there. First is any business model that's relying on the patient to monetize is a flawed business model, because we all are, many of us are willing to spend our money differently on healthcare versus other. I tell you, me personally, I could entertain buying the next iPhone for $1,000. If you told me today spend $1,000 to get better care, I'll think about it twice and want to better understand why am I spending that $1,000, right? Even though I can afford it. So it's not a matter of affording, let alone people that cannot afford it. So first important component of the business model, this will be free to patients and is free to patients today, will stay free to patients. The other important point is I see a lot of, in particular on the provider side, and sometimes on the nonprofit organization side, where they say, well, we're going to build an app and kind of solve this problem. This is a very expensive enterprise. To actually do it right and continue to maintain it is not something you could do on the side. And it's not something that does not require a lot of investment and a lot of money. So let's not fool ourselves that this needs to be a business that actually can sustain itself, right? And so the way we make money is really around, and we're transparent about this, we're focused today on essentially the life sciences industry. The life sciences industry, the way we think about it is pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, and diagnostic companies, those three pillars. And essentially what we focus on is a couple of things. One is bringing content that is sponsored in the app. We show it, it's shown as sponsored. We actually announced one of those relationships with Invite, genetic testing, where essentially the reason we do these deals, it's not ads, we don't do ads, but we do these deals when we see a win-win-win relationship, where there's something that, in this case, Invite, to take that example, genetic testing, inherited cancer, big deal, and that can provide value to the patient. So raise awareness, patient education there, and provide a partnership where, among other things, we're able to also facilitate access. So for example, in the month of October, we tried the pilot that we'd like to see how we can kind of scale it, where we cover the out-of-pocket costs. That's one element. Clinical trials recruitment is another element, where essentially we focus. So right now we're focusing on those two elements. With time, we'll focus on more, and we're always very transparent to people how we do this.
So that's relatively obvious. Essentially, you build a big enough community, you offer them services that are useful to that community, and obviously, we've discussed many times over, how many people can't get into clinical trials for the reasons. The more you can do the service that, the better. And genetic testing, obviously, in diagnostics is another area. What about the ultimate connection? You talked a bit about it, connection with the providers. Obviously, yes, you work with Mass General and Vanderbilt and a small like this, but the majority of cancer patients are out there. They're in the community. They're dealing with their community oncologists. They may or may not be having a great experience. But there hasn't been a really great connection between what the providers are providing them and the kind of their experience and their technology management of their own condition at home. A lot of people have tried this, but haven't really got very far, I would argue. So is that something that you think is something that's going to be coming to Outcomes4Me? And then what do you think that looks like in terms of cooperation with providers?
Yeah, so absolutely. So, and it's not only coming, we're already doing some of this. Some of it we haven't announced, so I'm not yet previewed to say who we're doing it with. The reason I did not mention it as part of the business model is because we do not think of those relationships specifically only as money-making relationships. The reason we do them, and we're able to be very flexible on how these contracts work, is essentially to enable the provider to deliver care. And where there's huge gaps, you mentioned, it's not at Mass General or Dana-Farber, right? Where there's a huge gap is in the community setting, in the smaller settings, where they need that technology. But typically it's too costly for them either to develop it or to access it. So we do now these deals where we provide the platform, and we could be very flexible on how the deal looks like. And we've done a couple of deals, they all look different. Because already the way those work is we better understand what the hospital issues are, what they're trying to solve, how does that create value to patients. We bring to bear the entire platform that we have, and then we make it so that it's win-win-win. Win for Outcomes4Me, win for the provider, and first and foremost, win for the patient. I also want to say just one thing. The reason the company is called Outcomes4Me is we're doing all this because our goal is to ultimately improve outcomes and accelerate the impact of research in patients' lives. And to really get there, you have to get closer to the patient. We're not close enough as a system to the patient.
No, I think you're spot on, and that interaction between provider and patient and how the patient is living their own life is incredibly important. So one sort of side question I have for you, which is, as I mentioned, there's been cancer communities and online forever, right? I wrote a study about cancer communities online in 1996 when you were just getting going on engineering or computational biology or whatever you were up to at MIT. And there were already very active cancer communities then. They've grown over time. There's a lot of knowledge in them. Is that something that you are going to build your own? Are you tapping into those? What's the relationship between apps that help people manage their care and all that kind of knowledge that's out there, whether it's on Facebook, on the old email threads, or wherever?
Yeah, so first of all, these, if we're gonna really help people navigate through their care, these are all one and the same, meaning it's part of what the needs, it's parts of meeting people where they are, right? Part of them is a social and an emotional need that's around these communities. So this is part of our plan. And the way we think about what we build versus what we partner is very, very simple. It's essentially, we know what our expertise is, and our expertise is to be truly consumer-grade, patient-focused technology. For everything else, we partner. Examples is content, right? I mentioned the NCCN, etc. Now, how we work with communities, we work and have worked and continue to work with patient associations. There are opportunities for us to bring communities into the platform, and then there are some things that I'll be happy to come and talk about them later on, where we're planning to take them to the next level, a level that today does not exist.
Okay, so that's something you focus on. Fantastic. Well, look, you've picked off, not an easy challenge, as you know. So very, very, very interesting. We're obviously keen to see how it goes. So let me ask you the future of the company. So right now you raised 16 million. You have about 20,000 patients on the system. How many employees are you? How many people are you on the team?
We're 20.
Right. I come back here in 2 years' time, and you've been very successful. How many patients are on the system, and what does Outcomes4Me look like?
Yeah, great question. So today, as I mentioned, 20,000, but only in breast cancer, only in the United States. And so our goal in 3 years from now will be in multiple cancers. We're already planning lung cancer, prostate cancer, a few number of them are coming. So it's across cancers. The second is we are primarily in the United States. We do a little bit in Canada, but our goal is also to be in Europe and broader, because what we built is very amenable to that. And we also kind of, are direct to patients, privacy, everything we do is beyond what the US laws are and much more aligned with some more stringent laws like Europe and others. And the third, and more importantly, is really having had true impact on patients, right? Whether it's clinical trials and having shown, impact of clinical trials on people, increasing the testing that could really save lives. I give you the example of genetic testing. These are just examples of, just from a people perspective, the impact, but also from a business perspective. So, I'm not going to give you a patient number, but I would hope that we're highly penetrated in many cancers.
A lot more than 20,000. I'll put that one down.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's great. It's great to hear. Very exciting what you're doing. Obviously incredibly needed. As I was saying earlier on, it's one of these things where we're all patients. It's kind of a BS term, but when you have cancer, my word, you need a lot of help on every area. So very good to hear that you're out there doing that. It's good to see you're one of the many companies who's really focusing on this arena. And obviously you have enough both business, scientific, and technical background, just yourself, let alone the rest of your team, to actually really understand the patient experience and make a difference. Fantastic. I've been talking with Maya Saeed. She is the CEO of Outcomes4Me, which is in the cancer patient empowerment space. I hope I got that right. Maya, thanks for your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this develops.
Thank you very much.